All right, I guess we can go ahead and start. So my name is Jacob Goff. I work over at the Grand Bay Near for the Department of Marine Resources. I'm the upland restoration specialist over there. I do anything and everything habitat management related. So that's prescribed fire, that's bird surveys, vegetation surveys. I do hog trapping out there, and I also do a good bit of GIS work. I got a geography degree from Southern Miss, which is what started me along this GIS path. So I've purposely tried to stick with it and expand my GIS knowledge while I've been at DMR, and hopefully I can impart some of that today, and everyone here will glean something useful from what I have to say. I'll be sticking to my notes pretty heavily today. Last night was pretty rough. AC went out at about 9 p.m. and we slept on the couch last night. So I'll be sticking pretty heavily to these notes. I'm going to start pretty basic. Full disclaimer with this, it's going to stay fairly basic based on the survey or the responses to the survey that we sent out. There's a lot of folks here that have never touched ArcPro or maybe not really familiar with GIS software in general. So I don't want to lose anyone. I will get into as many topics as I can that were the most popular based on the survey responses. Obviously, I can't talk about everything in a day, but I'll try to hit on the most popular topics that people said they wanted to hear about in the survey. Also, just to point out the obvious, I don't know what sort of data and GIS projects that you all deal with on a regular basis. And since I want this to be as helpful as it can be to you, I'm hoping that it's somewhat conversational. I'm going to go over, like I said, some basics, and then after lunch, I'd like to hear more about what specific data that you all deal with. And if you have any questions about that data or those projects or issues that you're dealing with, then maybe we can talk about it and address some of those, and y'all can have some real takeaways. So be thinking about that. If you don't already have something in mind, I want this to be fairly casual, fairly conversational. And if anyone has any questions at any point during the training today, just raise your hand, stop me. We can stop and talk about it. I believe that there's a lot of things, very basic things that are skipped in most GIS classes and trainings, especially in regards to having an organizational infrastructure in place to set yourself up for success whenever you're using any GIS software. Today's going to be all about ArcPro, a little bit about ArcGIS Online. So our organizational infrastructure that we're going to build today is going to be kind of tailored towards using Pro. I'm not sure why this is always skipped. I've had to kind of learn this the hard way along the way when using GIS software, which I say the hard way because once you have enough data amassed and enough projects amassed over years of working with it, it's hard to then take all that stuff that's not organized and make it organized. It's much easier just to start from the beginning with having an organizational structure in place. And that's going to look a little different for everyone, just depends on your case needs. For me, it just looks like a simple folder stored locally on my machine, on my local disk. And I want to emphasize that because whenever you're working with a group or an organization, oftentimes there is a shared location for data and GIS related projects, whether that be a network drive like what we use at DMR, or if that's ArcGIS Online or Google Drive, some sort of cloud storage. And if you are connecting to that data that exists on the internet or in a shared location with Pro, trying to run tools on that data, trying to display that data, Pro is going to run much slower than it would if that data was stored locally on your machine. So I always have a local location, and then any finished data, maps, projects that I want to share, once I'm finished with it, I can move that to a shared location for everyone else to have access to. All right, so I'm just going to make a folder real quick that we'll work out of today. Call this direct training. Everyone is welcome and encouraged to follow along on your computers. I'm going to be dealing with a little bit of data that only I have access to, but then I'm also going to be downloading some data from open source sites that everyone else can if they'd like to follow along. So before we open up Pro at all, we're going to make ourselves a little bit of organizational infrastructure. And like I said, for me, it's going to be a folder on my machine, and I'm going to have some subfolders. And some of the important ones for me is having a project folder. Whenever you open up Pro, all of your work is based on projects. That's how Pro operates, and I like to have a subfolder for each project that I'm working with within my projects folder. I also like to have a final maps folder. Whenever you create a map and export that map, you absolutely can store that finished map within the folder of the project from which the map was created. But I like to have a separate folder that I can just store all my maps. That way I can find them very quickly, and I don't have to sort through data and geodatabases and folders within my project folder just to find a PNG or a PDF or JPEG of a map. Let's see what else we're going to have. I like to have a folder for drone imagery that either I collect myself or is given to me. I like to have a folder for Earth observation imagery. This could be like Landsat or Sentinel data, or a digital elevation model from somewhere. I like to just have separate folders for all of those items so I know where to easily find them. Really like to have a folder for KML files. And this is because I work with folks that are in the field all the time. And KML files are kind of that lowest entry point to working with spatial data. Anybody can have Google Earth on their phone. You can send them a KML of some sort of vector data, and in the field they can open that. Google Earth doesn't cost anything. It doesn't require any GIS knowledge. So I like to have a folder for my KML so that I can easily export data as a KML and share it with anybody who needs it in the field. Let's do a couple more. I like to have a folder for training. Esri.com has a course catalog with over 500 different training courses that you can go through, and I highly recommend it, and we'll check it out today. But whenever you go through one of those training courses, it always has associated projects and data for download. And so I like to keep that separate from my projects, and it just keeps things a little cleaner for me. I like to have a folder for sharing data with folks. We're going to go over how to package data and share it with other GIS users, and I like to have a separate folder just for that. And I'll stop right there, but you can have as many folders in this as you want. This is your organizational structure. Definitely have a organizational structure and method in place before you get started with GIS. It's gonna save you in the long run, save you a lot of heartache. And we can also, which we're gonna get into, set some defaults in Pro so that it is automatically storing data in locations within this organizational infrastructure. So does that make sense? to everyone? Cool. All right, so we've got that in place. Now we can start up Arc Pro. So the way that Pro is licensed for you guys, with I guess the exception of Nate, because he has a NOAA hosted ArcGIS online account like I do, is a little different for how it is configured for us over at DMR. I believe you'll have to use concurrent licensing, and you don't actually sign into Pro when you use it. That's correct. So there's a little bit of functional limitations along with that. If you can't sign into Pro, then you're a little bit limited on connecting to online portals, which would be how you connect to your online account and easily bring in data into Pro through the catalog within Pro. And we'll take a look at the catalog as well. But being able to sign into Pro allows you to access all that data and bring data into your projects without having to open up the browser and go to arcgisonline.com and download data and then connect to that data just to bring it into your project, which we can deal with if you can't sign in. But whenever you open up Pro, and if anybody needs me to pause, if you need to configure any sort of license, I can. Just let me know. I think everybody's good. All right, so we've done credentials. This is the home page of Pro. We're going to take a look at settings first before we explore this home page. Under the About tab in your settings, you can have this box checked for checking updates upon startup. I think there may also be some university standards for updates with Pro.
Yeah. I don't think we can update it.
Can't update it. Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to re-download the whole thing.
All right.
Which is a nightmare.
That's awesome.
Do that.
Yeah. So maybe don't have this box checked if it's not relevant to you, if you don't want to re-download the whole program. I guess maybe if you got far enough out of date with the software, it would be worth it. But that's, I guess, a personal call for everybody. That does sound like a nightmare. The other thing, if you could sign into Pro, this is where you would add a portal so that you could access all of your online data through the catalog. I don't think that's going to be relevant for anyone here if you can't sign into Pro. And the other thing that's worth exploring in these settings is the options dialog box. This is where you can set a lot of Pro's defaults, and that will help streamline projects for you, streamline saving data to certain locations. Under units, whenever you open up a new project in Pro, you can set what you want your default units to be for, distance, area, location, direction, all of these different units. You can select what defaults that you like to work with or that your organization has standards for. So if your organization has standards for, what they want distance units to be in when it comes to maps or spatial references, coordinate systems, then obviously you would set your defaults to be whatever your organization standards are. If you don't have those standards, then you can make this whatever you'd like for it to be. Under the General tab, Start Pro, let's see, that's not too important. Create projects. So this is where our organizational infrastructure that we just made starts to become important. Whenever you create a new project in Pro, the software by default is going to have new projects are saved in a default location, which is this arbitrary folder that was installed on your computer whenever the software was installed. And I don't recommend leaving that as the default, because you're going to wonder where all your data is one day and you can't find it. It's going to be buried. So if you have your organizational infrastructure in place, you can select a custom location for your new projects. And right now we'll browse to that new folder that we just made. Let's see. Where is it? Here you go. ArcGIS training and projects. So I want all of my new projects that I open in Pro to automatically be saved to this project folder. And as long as, that's where I want all of my projects to be, I'm never going to have to browse to a saved location again for projects. That saves time, and I also like to leave this create a folder for the project box checked. That way Pro is going to automatically create subfolders for each project within that project folder. For Geodatabase and toolboxes, I leave all those set as creating new defaults for each project. Application theme, you can make it light or dark. If you change that, you do have to restart the software for those changes to take effect. For project recovery, I would absolutely have this box checked. It has saved me multiple times. Creating a backup at a certain time interval. I have mine set for every 5 minutes. If I lose 5 minutes worth of work, that's okay with me. I don't want to lose hours, potentially days worth of work. Working out at the near, we get bad storms all the time. Power goes down randomly. So this saves me all the time. I'll definitely have that checked. We'll explore a few other of these options here. Under map and scene, you can select what you want your default base map to be. I use a variety of base maps just depending on the map that I'm trying to make or the data that I'm trying to visualize. But I probably use imagery hybrid more often than anything else. And so under map, that's what I have selected. So when I load up a new project in Pro, that base map is already there. All of these defaults can be changed within a project, so you're not stuck with anything that you select here. This is just like setting up your favorites. Same goes for spatial reference. I have the spatial reference that I work within the most loaded up here. So that when I open up a new project, the map view is already in that spatial reference. Again, working with a group, working with an organization, y'all may have standards for the spatial reference that you want your data to be saved in or your maps to be created with. If that's the case, then you could search for that spatial reference here in the XY coordinate system search box and find your geographic or projected coordinate system. If there's a few coordinate systems that you use a lot, once you find that coordinate system, you can right click on it and add it to favorites. And then it'll be tucked up here in the favorites drop down menu. That's useful because there are so many projections out there. It can be a pain to try to filter through them every time you want to change to a coordinate system that you use on a regular basis. Yes, the rest of this. Yeah, I'm probably not going to explore too much more of this stuff, but it's worth checking out. You can customize the interface of Pro, which you can do within a project as well, but it's just all right here in a concise location in this dialog box. So if you're interested, I would explore these different options and see what defaults you can set to tailor Pro to whatever experience that you want to have. So we'll go back. So depending on what version of Pro that you've got downloaded, which there's no telling if you've got to re-download the whole software every time you want to update it. This might look a little different, but the idea is going to be the same. You're going to have your recent projects here that you can select from if you don't want to start up a new one. If you want to select one to continue your work, you can do so here. If you want to open up a new project, there are some different options here. Today, we're going to be working with a map. Also, before we actually get into a project, I want to touch on the learning resources. I think this is especially helpful if you are familiar with ArcMap, but you're not familiar with Pro and you're trying to go through this ArcMap to Pro migration process. I feel for you if you're still going through that. They have a section over here that's called Coming from ArcMap. They have a ArcGIS Pro migration guide there. I definitely recommend you check that out. It's full of helpful links of how to take your data that is formatted to work with map and format it to work with Pro without losing all your data, having to start over. I think that's what probably, other than learning a new interface, scares people the most about Pro is I don't want to lose all this progress, and you don't have to. There's a lot of resources here and online. A lot of quick start tutorials here that I recommend checking out. And along that note, there are, like I mentioned, there's a course catalog on Esri.com where you can filter through trainings. If I will, this will minimize so I can get some. There we go. We'll just check that out real quick. If I go to Esri.com. Now, here's where you can sign in. I think I just recently learned how y'all can sign in as MSU faculty. So where was that at? That was going to MS state, maps.arcgis.com. So if y'all go to that website, you can use your MSU Net ID and password to log into ArcGIS Online. I'm not sure if there's anyone that you would have to reach out to beforehand to do some sort of background process for your profile, or if everybody already has a profile and it's just a matter of accessing it. You can try going to this website and seeing how it works out. I'm logged into Amanda's profile right now, and this is the I guess the Geo platform for Mississippi State University. And you would use that same login information, your MSU Net ID and password, to log into Esri.com. So log in. You can't actually use their training courses without logging in, which is why that's important. So at Esri.com, along the top of the page on this ribbon here, you've got support and services. Under that drop-down menu, there's an option for training. We'll get into Pro eventually, I promise. I'm just trying to give resources here. Okay, once this finally loads, they have a course catalog button along this blue ribbon. And that loads the 500 plus trainings, many of which are free. Some that are instructor led they do cost, but there's so many free trainings here, and you can search for courses, you can browse by topic, you can filter these courses, sort these courses based on what you're trying to learn about, what you're trying to find. If you're interested in learning anything Esri GIS product related out of this training, I would go to this course catalog and just train away. You can, if you're logged in, you can actually create learning courses or training courses for yourself. So if I were to go to any of these courses here, I think you'd actually have to go to my academy, and that would bring up a, this is being so slow, it's probably not worth it. Okay. So I went to my academy and my dashboard, my learning activity. Somewhere in here you can make learning plans, but there it is. Create a learning plan under my learning plans. And once you have a learning plan created, whenever you go to a training within that course catalog, it'll give you an option to add it to a learning plan that you've created. So, say you want to learn about a certain topic and there's a lot of different trainings related to that topic, you can add them all to one learning plan and have them organized. That way, if you exit the website and come back at another time, you can pick up right where you left off without having to search the catalog for those trainings. I'm going to leave this up because that's going to be important later. So just wanted to touch on that. There's a lot of training resources out there. And so back to Pro. Okay, so we're going to start a new project in Pro. To do that, I'll click on Map, and you'll notice that my default location, I guess, didn't change earlier. Maybe I needed to restart the software in order to make that change take effect. So it's not trying to save it to that new organizational infrastructure that we created. So I'll just browse to it. Project folder, and okay. So this is going to be a new project stored in a subfolder within that project folder. We'll just name this CREC training. If I could spell it, it'd be even better. And hit OK. It's going to create a project for us once that loads. So Pro, the interface of Pro is based on ribbons and tabs and groups, a lot like other Microsoft programs are. And then you have panes and views and tables and whatnot. So here in the middle, when the map view opens, that is your map view. Now, why does my world look funny here? That's because of the default spatial reference that I've selected. It's minimizing the amount of distortion on the eastern part of Mississippi. So that's why I chose that spatial reference. Probably not going to have time today to go in depth on spatial references, but just know anytime you're trying to take a globe and project that onto a 2D surface, there's going to be some level of distortion. And there are so many different options for spatial references because each one of them tries to minimize distortion for a different location. And there's a near infinite number of locations. So for this projection, it minimizes the distortion on the eastern part of Mississippi. And I picked that one out of the state plane projections. There are state plane projections for every state, and I think nearly all of them split the state in two along its longest axis. So for like Mississippi and Alabama, you'll have east and west options for those projections. For a state like Tennessee, you would have a north and south. So you can get pretty granular with spatial references. Anyway. So over here on the left side of the screen, you've got a contents tab. Who is like not familiar with Pro at all, or just very little? Cool. So this is relevant. I just want to make sure that I'm not boring everybody. On the left side of the screen, you'll have your contents tab. This is where you're going to see all the layers that you have loaded up on your map. And you can sort these layers in your context or your contents tab based on drawing order. So your layer that is drawn on top, the topmost drawing layer on your map, is going to appear first in your drawing order in the table of contents. You can list your layers by source, by selection. I almost never pick anything except for ordering by drawing order, because for me that just makes intuitive sense. I want to see what's drawn on top be the first option in my table of contents. And if you have a lot of layers on your map, you can search your layers at the top of the contents page, or contents pane rather. Your catalog pane may or may not appear right away by default. If it does not, you can find it under the View tab. We're going to be working a lot out of the catalog pane today. And then within the Windows group on the View tab, there is Catalog pane. And this might appear in a different location on your screen. You can grab any of these panes, the Catalog pane, Contents pane, any one of them. Grab the top of the pane and you can dock this pane anywhere on the screen that you would like. You have these different docking stations appear. I like to keep mine over here on the right and my contents pane on the left. That maximizes my map view in the middle. Let's see here. Another pane that you'll probably use a lot in Pro is your geoprocessing pane. And that is within the same group as your catalog view. I click on geoprocessing. For me, I have that docked in the same location as my catalog pane. And then I have tabs here at the bottom where I can toggle back and forth between these views. The geoprocessing pane is where you'll find all of your tools that you can use to manipulate your data, edit vector data, raster data. There is a whole slew of toolboxes here. And for the most part, it's very similar to ArcMap. If you're more familiar with ArcMap, most of these tools that were in ArcMap are going to be here in Pro. They do phase out tools sometimes and add new ones, but for the most part, they'll be the same tools. If there are tools that you use on a regular basis, you can right-click that tool, such as, let's say I use Clip a lot. I can right-click that tool and add to my project favorites. If I go back, it'll appear under my favorites, and I don't have to go searching for it every time I want to look for it. Back to the catalog pane. There's kind of a lot to unpack with the catalog pane. These tabs across the top, project, portal, computer, favorites, you'll work mostly out of this projects tab. That's where you see all of your relevant data to the project that you're currently working on. You'll have your maps. As you add map tabs across the top of the map view here, they'll appear over here in your maps folder. And as a side note, that's another way that you can stay organized with Pro, not just your organizational infrastructure that you made in the beginning, but you can have as many map and layout tabs open as you want to within one project in Pro. So if you are working on a project where you need multiple different maps for that project, then you don't have to open up more than one ArcPro project like you would have to with ArcMap. If I was working on, say, something like the conservation grazing project that Amanda's working on. And I had multiple maps associated with that project. Come to the insert tab at the top of the page, click new map. Now I have a new map, and I can rename these anything I want. Conservation and grazing. That map appears at the top of the map view in my drawing order and over here in my maps folder. It's all updating in real time. If I close out of it, in my map view, I can always come back to my maps folder and reopen it. For databases, Pro will, by default, unless you change it, create a new default geodatabase for every project. That's going to be your home geodatabase. It's going to share the same name as your project. So I named this project CREC Training, and that's the name of my home geodatabase. As sort of a housekeeping item, there's another kind of best practices thing that I always do, and that is to create a scratch geodatabase. Whenever you're running tools on layers within your project, you may have several intermediate steps on your way to your final version of whatever layer or product you're trying to create. And there's going to be layers created at each one of those intermediate steps. And maybe you don't want all of those layers to clutter up your home geodatabase where you want all your final data stored. By default, that's exactly what Pro is going to do. It's going to save all of that intermediate stuff into this home geodatabase. So in order to keep things a little cleaner, I will right-click on Databases, and I will add a new file geodatabase. And I like to name it the same as my home geodatabase, just with the word scratch in front of it. Once that updates, it should appear under your databases. If it doesn't, you can right-click on Databases and hit refresh, and that should make it appear. So that's not going to be enough to get Pro to store your scratch work in that geodatabase. Come over to the Analysis tab at the top of the ribbon. In the Geoprocessing group, there will be an Environments button. Click on Environments. You can see under Workspace, you have a current and a scratch workspace. And our default geodatabase for both of these workspaces is our home geodatabase. I want to change the scratch workspace to the geodatabase that we just created. So I will click on Browse. I'll click on Databases, and there's my scratch geodatabase. I hit OK. There are some other defaults here that you could explore and change if you would like to. I'm not going to do that today. So I'm just going to hit OK. And that's a simple, easy step to declutter your life whenever you're working on a project in Pro. Especially, some of these projects can be ongoing for years and just constantly be getting updated, and that'll go a long way to keeping the project clutter-free. So I like to do that every time. Let's see here. Let's talk about more of this catalog pane. If you move over from the project tab to the portal tab within the catalog pane, I've got some options here that you might not have if you're not signed into Pro, but you should at least have the option to go to the Living Atlas, which is this little book in front of this cloud icon. And this is where you can search Esri's online database. It's all open source stuff, and it's extremely extensive. You can also go to, this is kind of a, I guess, a dumbed down way to search their Living Atlas. If you would like to see more of the metadata associated with the different things in the Living Atlas before you add it to your map. You can open up a new browser window. Yeah, I think it's something like Living Atlas of the World. Yeah, ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. Click on that. And then browse towards the top of the screen. And this is the exact same catalog that you're viewing in Pro in your catalog view. It just gives you a lot more filter options for browsing and search options. It gives you thumbnails, and you can see, you know, each item here will have its own web page. When you click on it, that will show you more of its metadata if the user that uploaded it included enough good metadata. And if it's in the Living Atlas, it should have that, because everything in the Living Atlas goes through a vetting system by Esri. You can nominate any of your own content to be placed in the Living Atlas. They just have to vet it and approve it. And a lot of that has to do with having an appropriate amount of metadata that you see here. So this can be really helpful. It can save you some time to come here and check out these layers, as opposed to just throwing layers in your map and seeing if that's what you needed or not. And you know, if Pro is being slow at all for you, then that can waste a lot of time. So that's another cool resource. If you are signed into Pro, then you have access to all of the content that you personally have stored on ArcGIS Online, as well as content that is shared with you by groups that you're in or your organization. I'm going to assume that those options are grayed out for anyone who's not able to sign into Pro. That doesn't mean that you can't take advantage of ArcGIS Online. You still have a profile like we were looking at earlier. I still have that pulled up. Maybe, yep. So at arcgis.com, you still have a profile, and you can still, I believe, create groups. Yes, you can create groups. So anyone here that is sharing spatial data with each other, I think y'all use Google Drive for that, which there's nothing wrong with if it works for you. But this is another option for storing and sharing spatial data. And I'm going to get way more into sharing data a little later on. But this is where you would access that sort of thing if you could sign into Pro. The favorites tab, for me, I have a lot of style files here. I believe that's one of the folders that we created in our organizational infrastructure. It's not. Let's add it. I like having a folder for Esri style files because it expands my symbology options, and I'm way more of a cartography nerd than I am a spatial data analysis nerd. So I love style files. This is kind of a side tangent. In order to find style files, you can Google Esri style files. And I'm going to put all of these in a resource document that I'll email to everyone that's here and listening over Zoom that wants to have it. This option here, ArcGIS Pro Styles, if you click on that, you're going to have access to what they lump into industry and creative files, style files. You can download any of these, and like I said, the only purpose of these is just to expand your symbology options. If you're crazy about cartography like me and you download every single one of them and you load them into Pro, it does make the symbology pane of Pro run quite a bit slower. So fair warning about that, but I think it's worth having the expanded symbology abilities. You can make a map look like it's made out of Legos if you want to. You can do all kinds of stuff here. A lot of these are made by John Nelson. He works for Esri. He's my favorite cartographer, and I'm not going to be able to get much into cartography today because I could talk for way too long about it. But I'll have his YouTube linked in that resource document. And if you want to know more about upping your map making skills, he's the guy to watch. So any of these can be downloaded. If you want to just hover over the thumbnail, you can download one of these. Just for the sake of it, we'll do an example. We'll download it. Legos map. And go to, actually, it's confusing because I've got this computer and I'm also like remoting into my work computer at the near, so I've got so many windows here. And I did download it to this computer instead of my work computer. I shouldn't have done that. Oh well. Let's see, that would be under downloads. And you would have this style X file. And if I had downloaded it to my work computer where I made the organizational infrastructure, I could move that style file into the style folder that I just made. And then I could browse to that location and add it to my project. Under your favorites, for me, like I said, this is mostly style files, and then the main geodatabase that we all work out of at Grand Bay. You can add items to your favorites by selecting this drop-down menu, selecting the file type that you want to add to your favorites and browsing to it. And once it is in your favorites, you can right-click it, add it to your current project. And if you check this box to add to new projects, then every project you open from then on out will automatically have that file loaded up. And if it's something that you use often, that just saves a lot of time. Okay. So back to geodatabases. Yeah, my style folder for this project is full of all of those styles that you saw in the favorites. Under folders, oh, I should hit on this real quick. Under your folder connections in your catalog, you're automatically going to be connected to the home folder that Pro creates as your default folder with the project. I like to add a folder connection to connect to that overall organizational folder that we created earlier. Desktop, CREC training, okay. So now that folder is connected to this project. And if I do the drop down menu on that folder, I can see all of the subfolders within it. So now that makes it way easier for me to add data to the project directly from my catalog instead of having to browse and go look for it like that. And also right click it and add it to my favorites. Right click again, add to new projects. Every new project I open, I'll have my organizational folder connected to the project. Okay, now geodatabases. So we'll go over this and then we'll take a short break. For ArcMap used personal geodatabases. So you're probably familiar with those if you worked with ArcMap much at all. Those are not compatible with Pro, which is why I think a lot of people are hesitant to transition over to Pro because the geodatabases aren't compatible, but all of your data within those personal geodatabases can be transferred to file geodatabases, which is what Pro uses. And there's plenty of details on how to do that in that migration guide that I pointed out earlier. So for a file geodatabase, it can store featured data sets, featured classes, rasters, which rasters are no different in Pro as they were in ArcMap. Featured classes have kind of taken the place of shapefiles, although Pro will open and display a shapefile if you upload it into your map. So I just opened up the Grand Bay Near Geodatabase, and most of what you're seeing here are featured data sets. If you think of a geodatabase as your filing cabinet, these featured data sets are the drawers. And if I open one of them, it takes a moment to open because this database is stored on a shared network drive. And it kind of illustrates the point that I was making earlier. If this was on my local disk, it would have just opened immediately. But it's pretty slow whenever things are stored on a shared location. Each one of these items within that featured data set that I just opened is a featured class. So those are like the files within the drawer. When it comes to vector data, point, line, and polygon data, that's how a file geodatabase will handle it. You can have standalone rasters, which I do down here. A lot of these are drone imagery rasters. One of them is a digital elevation model. You can have a mosaic data set, which is multiple rasters stitched together. Geodatabase will store CAD files. It can store standalone tables. And we're going to get into working with tables here soon because that was a pretty popular topic for the survey responses. So that's kind of the file geodatabase in a nutshell and what it can store. One more thing I want to mention before we get into tables, and then we'll take a break. And that's how to bring data into Pro. And there's a lot of options. There's usually more than one way to do anything in Pro. If I come to the Map tab at the top of the ribbon, within the layer group, I have an Add Data button. If I expand the drop-down menu, I have several options here about how to bring data into my project. If you select the first option, data, it's going to open up a File Explorer dialog box, like that one, where you can browse to the data location, select it, and add it to your map. Sometimes that's cumbersome, especially if you're like us and you have network drives that are huge and full of a ridiculous amount of data. That sometimes can be prepared. Adding data from a path. Sometimes this is nice if you have the file path copied from your File Explorer, then you can select this option and paste that file path in that dialog box, and it will go look for the data for you in that location you specified and add it to your project. XY point data, we're going to go over that a little more when I talk about tables, but if you have a table that has some latitude and longitude columns in it, then you can select this option, XY point data, browse to that table location, select it. ArcPro will ask you which columns you want to use for lat and for long, and it'll create a point vector layer on your map using the table as the attributes for that layer. I don't really ever use any of these other options for adding data, and some of them even require some special licensing and permitting from whoever hosts your ArcGIS Online account to use. So I don't mess with those too much. You can also add data directly from a geodatabase. So I could bring something in from our Grand Bay Near Geodatabase. I could right click it, the layer that I want to add, and select Add to Current Map, and it would do so. Or I could click and drag it onto the map, which it doesn't want to do for some reason. There it goes. And it being the first layer that I'm adding to the map, when it does add the data, it's going to zoom to the extent of the data. And this is just boat ramp locations around the Grand Bay Near. Again, it's slow because it's on a network drive. Yeah, we have boat ramp locations, and then those vector points can be symbolized however you would like. So you can add data from a geodatabase. We'll remove that from our table of contents. You can add data directly from a folder. If you have it stored in a folder, you can add data from your portal directly from the Living Atlas, which when we get into working with tables, we're going to add some data from the Living Atlas. You can also come to this computer tab at the top of the catalog pane, and it gives you a view that's a lot like your file explorer. And I think this is a little less cumbersome than opening up a file explorer dialog window because I can explore my computer files in the exact same way, just right here within the catalog, and put that data directly into my project. All right. So I think it's probably safe to say that the majority of the data that everybody here works with on a regular basis is in table format in one way or another, whether that's Excel spreadsheets or whatever format you might be working with. And like I said, based on the survey responses, I think that working with table data, working with data queries, which directly relates to working with tables, was some of our popular responses. So we're gonna devote a good bit of time to looking at how Pro handles tables and how you can glean information from tables in Pro. There's really two different types of tables that you'll see in Pro, and that's attribute tables and standalone tables. And the difference there being that attribute tables are tied directly to some sort of geographic data. An example of this, let's see, I have a layer here that shows the habitat management units at Grand Bay. This is a polygon vector layer. Here, there we go. And if I were to come over to this layer in my table of contents, there's, again, more than one way to do anything in Pro. I could right click on this and go to my attribute table, which would open up the table pane, and I could look at those attributes. There are some keyboard shortcuts. You can hold down Control and double click on a layer, and it'll bring up the attribute table. You can right click a layer and hit A, and it'll bring it up. I don't know why there's so many shortcuts for the same thing. You can also look at the attribute table of a layer before you even bring it into your map. So if I remove this layer from my map and I just have it, over here visible in my catalog, it's within a geodatabase. Before I add it to my project, I can right click and select Open Table, and I can view the attribute data, the data about the data. And sometimes that's useful, especially if you're not sure if you want to add that data to your project. You can save yourself some time, save the time it takes for Pro to draw the data if it's a giant data set, by opening up the table and checking out the attributes about that and seeing if that is useful to your project. Close out of that. I'm going to re-add this to my map. We're going to work with this table a good bit. Standalone tables, just a note about them real quick, and they are not tied to any sort of geographic data. So if you have an Excel spreadsheet with whatever information in it, and you brought that into Pro, which you can't directly do. We'll talk about how to bring in an Excel spreadsheet into Pro and view it. you could view the table just like you could view an attribute table, but you're limited in the functionality of that table. Mainly because a standalone table is what's known as a non-OID. It doesn't have an object ID column. I come over here and open up the attribute table again for my management units. You'll notice the first column is object ID. Object ID and for a polygon layer shape are two fields that the software automatically adds to my attribute table. It's not for me, it's for the software and for data management on the end of the software. So object ID is just one of the ways in which ArcPro keeps track of things and makes sense of the attribute data associated with these geographic features. So if I were to bring in just a standalone table that didn't have this object ID column, it would be a non-OID table, and it would be limited in its functionality within Pro. This attribute table, I can add fields, take away fields, do all sorts of edits. For a standalone table, I could edit the table outside of Pro and refresh it within Pro to see my updates, but I can't really do much of anything with it besides joining it to another table, which we'll get into some table joins here in a minute. Okay, where am I at here? Bear with me, I gotta stick with my notes. So once you've got an attribute table open, which this, just like your contents pane and catalog pane, you can move this around. Hello, there we go. And dock it different places. You can also just float it. Just straight up disappeared, didn't it? Don't really know where it went. Probably on my other screen. I've got two screens on my work computer that I am. Yeah, okay. So it floated to my other screen, my work desk, which is kind of nice. If you do have two screens, you can get an attribute table completely out of the way of your map view. You know, keep your map view from being cluttered up, and that way you can see more of your actual geographic features on the map and see more of your attribute table at the same time. So we'll bring this back over here and dock it. Go back to that display. You can select records. Each one of these rows corresponds with a geographic feature on the map. So if I were to zoom out so I could see all of this and select one of these records, you would see what geographic feature that record corresponds with. I could clear my selection, come over here and do the same thing on my map. If I click on a geographic feature, I see which record in the attribute table that feature is associated with. You can select multiple records by holding down the control key. You can select a range of records by holding down the shift key, which that's no different than most Microsoft software. You can, if you had a very large attribute table, which we'll look at, we'll download some census data so we can see what a really big attribute table looks like. You can select by attributes, and we'll do a new selection, and then you can, this is essentially running a query on your attribute table where you pick a field, and then you add a function to the clause. You got all these different functions here, and then you'll have values over here. And after you apply that to your attribute table, it'll make a selection based on that query that you just made. If you have a lot of fields, a lot of columns in your attribute table, and you would like to, let me clear my selection here, and you would like to compare one column at one end of the attribute table to the other, you can right click the header of any one of these fields and freeze the field. Now there's not enough columns here in this particular attribute table to do this, but if I were to do it and then scroll to see my other fields, this one would stay docked here on the left side of the screen. I'll unfreeze it. You can move fields around. You can also work with me here. We can also add fields and edit this. You have some limited functionality in doing that directly from the attribute table through this add field button. This is what's going to pop up. Another way that you could go about discards changes. Another way you could go about doing that is right-clicking on the layer that you want to edit the attribute table of in your table of contents. Go to Data Design and Fields. Actually, the exact same window. All right, so if you were to add a field, let's say we want to know how many acres each one of these management units are. So we click on Add a Field, name the field. I'm just going to name it acres. If you want to give it an alias, you can. In this case, I'm not. And if you don't, the alias is the same as the field name. For data type, because this is going to be a number, I'm going to choose double. And over here, number format. If you double click in this a couple of times, you're going to get this browse button that comes up, and you can select your number format. This is just going to be numeric for decimal places. I really don't need more than 2 in this case. I'll hit OK. And while you are editing an attribute table, you're going to get this fields tab appear on the ribbon, and that's what's going to open up. You're going to need to save your changes, which is a different save button than saving your project. You can have an editing session open in Pro, and the saves for that is independent of your saves for the overall project. And if you happen to have an editing session open that you haven't saved the changes on and you try to go do anything else in Pro, it'll yell at you and it'll let you know that you have unsaved edits. So we'll hit the save button on what we just created and exit out of this fields pane. Let's make this a little bigger so everyone can see. Now I have an acres field with a bunch of null values because it's not going to automatically calculate it for me. It doesn't know what I want to be there. Despite the fact that it's named acres, it's not going to read that and automatically calculate acres for me. So at the field header, I can right click acres and select calculate geometry. And this dialog box is going to appear. For field, because we right clicked on acres, it's already in this field drop down box, but we could select any of the fields that we have here in the attribute table. For property, I'm going to select area. Then I'm going to get an area unit drop down menu appear. And I want to do US survey acres. And I won't worry about the coordinate system. It's going to automatically make it the same as my map coordinate system. I'll hit OK. And it automatically calculated what each and every one of those management units are as far as their size. So that's nice. You can run those sorts of different, you're only limited by your imagination on what sort of geometry calculations you can run within an attribute table. And did that do any sort of edits to be saved? No, it did not. But I am going to go ahead and save my project because you should always be saving your project all the time. Okay. I'm going to put a pin in that and move on to standalone tables. Like I said, they can't be modified in table view. They contain read-only tabular data. And a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet would be an example of this type of data. So I have a spreadsheet that we can look at. Like I mentioned when I introduced myself, trapping hogs is one of the things that I do at Grand Bay, and I've got an Excel spreadsheet that has all of that data in it. And that exists somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, I put it here. Okay. So I have this Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to add a folder connection in Pro to this folder. So that we can see it a little more easily. Okay. So in your catalog view, an Excel spreadsheet will show up. But if I try to do anything with it, if I try to expand this Excel document to see what sheets are inside of it, I'm going to receive an error because I don't have the required Microsoft drivers installed on my machine to allow Pro to handle an Excel spreadsheet. You could have Microsoft drivers installed, depending on what the university stance is on that, what the process is for that. I'm not sure. I know that I would have to reach out to my IT department and possibly get some sort of permissions from NOAA, who hosts my ArcGIS Online account. And I just don't want to bother with that. So if I've got all of my data stored in an Excel spreadsheet, in order for Pro to handle it, I need to reformat it as a text file. So let's open this spreadsheet and see what kind of data we have in it. So right here, we have a latitude and a longitude column included in this data, which means that we could convert it to a point vector file. Right now, it's just a standalone table. To get an Excel spreadsheet into Pro, I'm going to come over here to File, and I'm going to save a copy. And I'm going to select CSV, comma, delimited file. Where's it being saved at? Okay, same location. And we'll save it. So now I have a copy of that same spreadsheet with all the same information in it. It's just a CSV file. I can open that up to confirm that it is the same. This is the, yeah. Cool. So exact same information, but Pro is going to read it very differently than it would the original Excel spreadsheet. And if you're used to using software like R, then you're probably already aware of this, how it reads text files. If I were to open these with different software, if I were to open them with Notepad, this is the original Excel spreadsheet, and this is all Pro sees, and it has no idea what to do with it, because why would it? If I were to open up the CSV file, if we did this correctly, it's going to look much more manageable. So the text file is what Pro is trying to read whenever you're bringing in a standalone table. This top row here will become your field headers. So an important note about that, whenever you are making a table, your first row, you should always come up with names for your field headers. If you don't, and your first row includes some of your data, that will become your field headers in Pro, and that data won't be included within the table itself. So definitely, insert a row at the very top, come up with field header names. They have to start with a letter. They can only include letters, numbers, and underscores, and it can't be over 64 characters or something like that. So there's just a few, things there to be aware of whenever you're formatting your table data to bring into Pro. So now that we have both of these tables, go back to Pro. And I'll make sure I'm on track here. Another note about formatting: if you've got cells with numeric data or dates, ensure that the content is consistently formatted. If you have a column in your spreadsheet and it's either numbers or dates, make sure that every entry in that column is formatted the same way. If it varies at all, if you have text thrown in there, then Pro is going to treat all of those values like they're supposed to be string text, and it's not going to work. So just make sure that your spreadsheet is consistently formatted. So this folder in catalog view, where we created or saved our CSV file to, it hasn't updated. So I'll right click it and hit refresh. And now I can see the CSV. I right click that and open the table. I can see all of my data that existed in my Excel spreadsheet. So it's kind of a roundabout way to get an Excel spreadsheet into Pro, but this is the easiest way to do so. Have some null values here. That's just because at that point in time I wasn't tracking that particular data. Have my lat and long data, that all looks good. So if I were to add this to my map, it doesn't appear anywhere because it's not tied to any sort of geographic data. It's a standalone table. But it is useful because you can join it to an attribute table that is tied to geographic data. Or in the case of this table, we can just make point vector data out of it because it has a latitude and longitude column. Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. I'm getting ahead of myself. One thing I wanted to note about what you can do with a standalone table, if we open it back up. Let's see here. So if I were to right click on one of these, let's see here, what do we want to summarize? Maybe management units. So each one of these rows, just for context purposes, corresponds to a hog that was trapped on the near. And so I have management units here to show which management unit the hogs were trapped out of. If I were to click on the field header there, I could, let's see, let's do visualize statistics. And if I select visualize statistics, Pro will create a chart for me. And I can, in this chart properties pane that pops up over here on the right, I can format this chart however I want to. It gives you a lot of creative control over things like the colors and the fonts, and then you can change, counts by management unit. Pro will do its best to throw titles in there for you, but you can change any of these titles: the x-axis title, management units, y-axis title, count. You can write a legend title and description for it if you'd like to. If I made a chart based off of a standalone table in Pro, and say I wanted to use it in a presentation, you have an export button here. I can export this as a graphic, and I can save this. We'll just save it in our home folder so it's easy to find. And you can name it, let's see, hogs caught by management units. And it will export that for us. We can navigate over to where we just saved that. We saved it in our new folder, projects, CREC training. There is hogs caught by management units. It saves it as an SVG file. If I open that up, I have this here, and I can save as whatever file format that I want to save it as, and I can include it in a presentation if I want to. So there is some creative things that you can do with standalone tables in Pro. You just can't change the data of them within Pro. All right, back to Pro. So we figured out how to display tabular data in Pro and how to convert that to point data. We need to convert this. So we know, because we looked at the attributes, that this has latitude and longitude data. If we right click that standalone table and we come down here to create points from table, select X, Y table to point. We have our input table. This is the only table that we have in our project, but if we had multiple tables, we could select from that. I guess it's also allowing me to select the attribute table of our management units. The output feature class, that is sort of a ridiculous name. Pro does its best, but we can just make it the same as the original. And if you'll notice, its default location for the output feature class is that scratch geodatabase that we made. So, this is not, at least for the purposes of this training, any sort of final piece of data that we're making. So I don't mind it throwing it in that scratch geodatabase for me. If eventually I make something out of this data that is in its final form and I want to share it, I can move it or export it to my main home geodatabase within the catalog and not have it cluttered up with everything else. It's going to do its best to pick the fields for X and Y, and it did it correctly, longitude and latitude. If it didn't, you could select this drop-down menu and tell it which field it needs to look at for the X and Y data. Coordinate system, we're going to leave that alone. The reason that I'm not going to change that coordinate system to match the coordinate system my map is in is because the data wasn't originally recorded in that spatial reference or that coordinate system. And so if I did, it would probably throw it off the coast of Louisiana or somewhere. It's one area it really likes to do that. So I'm just going to leave that alone. That's what Pro wants to display it as. WGS 1984. That's a geographic coordinate system, so it's actually unprojected. And I'll hit OK. And now I have all of these points showing up. I don't know how well they're going to show up because it's blue on blue. So if I click the symbol over here under the layer in my table of contents, which now I have a new layer in my table of contents, the point layer, I'm going to have a symbology pane pop up. And we'll just make this ugly and bigger, just so it's obvious on the screen. And I have auto apply toggled on for my symbology pane. If I didn't, I would have to come down here and hit apply after making these changes for them to take effect. I don't need the symbology pane anymore. I don't need the chart properties pane anymore. So I had a lot of rows in that attribute table, and it looks like now there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points on my map. Well, the reason being is because all of these correspond with trap locations, and there are a lot of hogs trapped at each location. So most of these points are multiple points stacked on top of each other because they have the same latitude and longitude data. And we can confirm that by going over to the layer and opening the attribute table. And all of those rows are still there. So there's a lot more points on the map than 7. They just happen to be stacked on top of each other for this data. So am I losing anyone, or does that make clear as mud? That makes sense? Okay. So now I want to talk about how to join tables together. Joining tables together can actually be really powerful. You can find spatial relationships and patterns that you didn't know existed, or answer spatial questions that you have by joining tables together. And if you would like, this is where I'm going to start downloading some open source data. So if you want to try to follow along, you'll be able to do so with this. When you join tables together, let's see here, what did I have here? Sorry, y'all, just blanked. The join functions, you can connect geographic features to standalone tables or standalone tables to each other. You can do an attribute join or a spatial join, and I'm going to show some examples of both. So let's go back to this management unit file that I have here. I'm going to toggle the hogs layer that we created off because we don't need it for now. And whoops, I don't have my cursor selected. I still don't. Why is it doing this to me? That's really cool. All right. One of the shortcuts in Pro is if you hold down the C button on your keypad there, no matter what type of cursor you have loaded up, if it's the select or if you're digitizing and building vector data, no matter what, if you hold down C, you'll get your Explore hand back and you can move around. And when it comes to digitizing, creating vector data, that is a wonderful shortcut. I use it all the time. Otherwise, you would have to exit out of your editing session, go back, get your Explore hand from your map tab, move the map, or you can try scrolling in and out in different places just so you can move around and continue to make the edits you need to make. Or you can just hold the C button down and move around. I don't know why it's acting like I have my select hand. Anyway, it's not important. Okay. So we're gonna take an attribute table and join it to a standalone table. So if I have, say, a layer of management units, which I do, and I have a standalone table that has prescribed fire data in it associated with those management units, which I do. Grand Bay Fire right here. Before we add that to the map, we'll open that table. Take a look at what's in it. And each one of these rows corresponds to a fire that happened at Grand Bay, a prescribed fire. This doesn't have any wildfire data in it. What it does have is the name of each management unit that was burned for that particular prescribed fire. Okay. All right. I open up my attribute table for my Grand Bay management units. I also have a name column for all of the management units as well. Let's see here. I think that might actually, not sure if they match. Whenever you are joining, you're going to use a common field. That field is called a key. They don't have to have the same field name, but they have to be the same field type. So they're either going to be a number or a string, text, something like that. But in both tables, whatever column you choose to join the tables with, they have to be the same field type. And what I really want is for these names to match the table names of this Grand Bay Fire. So I'm going to add this standalone table to the map that has my fire data in it. And I'm going to open the table. Now I have them side by side. Excuse me. And sure enough, some of these don't actually match up. Bear with me, I think I've got a different management units file where the names do match up. So I'm going to have a folder connection, find that data. Yes. Projects. Expand that. Oh, I've got a lot of them. Here we go. Let's check this out. Let's take this, add it to that. See if that's the one I meant to use. Yes, it is. So we'll just pretend that's what I had the whole time. GIS problems in real time. Okay, we're going to add the standalone table to this layer. Okay. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click on my geographic feature, my burn units. Come down here to joins and relates and do an add join. My input field, I'm going to select name. My join table, I don't want the hog table, I want Grand Bay Fire. And for the join field, I'm going to select name as well and hit OK. Now visually, that's not going to do anything because the standalone table isn't connected to any geographic data like I was mentioning before. But if we open up the attribute table of my management units, suddenly it has a lot more data in it than it did before. And all of that data is from the standalone table of Grand Bay Fire. You'll notice that I've got some null values in there. Now, when I join these two tables together, I use the name file. Not every management unit at Grand Bay has had fire. So I'm going to have fewer rows in the name file for my fire than I do in the management units. Just some of those management units, haven't gotten around to burning yet. So for those that haven't had any prescribed fire, I'm going to have null values there. And so that would be considered an attribute join. I'm going to put a pin in this and come back to it because I want to talk about spatial joins. But what this is going to give me the ability to do is I now have a lot more options for symbolizing this layer with all the information that is now currently in it. Okay, on to that open source data that I always try to get to. So for this, I'm going to go to open up a browser window, which of course opened up on the wrong screen. Come over here, please. And I'm going to just type in Maris data download. Mississippi Institution of Higher Learning has a decent library of geographic data. And so from here, we're going to pull in some data that we can use with our project. I want some census data. I'll download 2020 blocks, population, and housing. Let's go back. So that's going to be polygon data that's going to display census blocks and have that population and housing information stored in the attribute table of those of that polygon layer. We got under cultural. I actually have MSU County Extension sites. Let's download that. That'll be a point layer. That polygon, we have a point layer. Let's do a line layer. Actually, let's get it from a different source just to show some different sources. If we go back to Pro and we go over to Portal, everybody should have access to the Living Atlas, whether you sign into Pro or not. Select Living Atlas and search for, let's do United States Rivers. North American Lakes and Rivers, that should work. I'll right click that and add to current map. If anybody needs me to slow down, just yell at me and I will stop. And get you up to speed. So the North American Lakes and Rivers was added to the map directly from the Living Atlas, and they're pretty hard to see with their symbology against this satellite imagery base map. The lakes are pretty easy to see, but the rivers, not so much. So in order to make it easier to see, I'm going to come up here to my layer group under my map tab and select a different base map. And I'm just going to select light gray canvas and see how that looks. That's much better. You can see all those rivers a whole lot better now. Cool. So we downloaded this data from Maris, and it's going to show up in the form of zip files. So if we go to our File Explorer and go to our downloads, I'm going to right click each one of these one at a time, extract all. I should get a window that popped up, probably popped up on my other screen. It did. Jesus. Now, I would like for this to be extracted to a location that I'm already connected to within Pro. So I'm going to hit this browse button. And I'm going to navigate to my desktop and that organizational infrastructure that we just created. Go to project and open up my CREC training folder, and I'm just going to select that folder because I know I'm connected to that folder already through my ArcPro catalog. Select the folder and extract. That was the census one, and now I'll do the exact same thing for the MSU Extension Centers. It put that dialog box back on my other screen. Oh my gosh. I didn't know I was going to be plagued by this all day. Okay, let's browse. It's already got that folder loaded up because that is what I was at last time. Select that folder, extract. Okay, so if all went well, when we come back to Pro and we go to the Project tab at the top of our catalog pane, expand my home folder where those should be saved. If not, I'll hit the refresh button. Where did I? CREC GIS training, projects, CREC training. Oh, there they are. I just totally overlooked them. They're right there. Okay, I have my census blocks and my MSU county extensions. These are in the form of shape files. Pro handles shape files just fine. I can add both of them to the map, holding down Control, selecting them both, and I can just drag and drop them onto the map. That census data may take a second to load because there are so many polygons. So just so that Pro doesn't take so much time redrawing this layer every time I change my extent or I pan around, I'm just going to toggle that layer off in my drawing order. And that's going to save me some headache. If I zoom out, you can see my point layer of all of the MSU extension centers across the map. This would be probably a good moment to hit the save button on the project to make sure we don't lose any progress. Everybody good? Okay, so we're gonna play around with the attribute tables of this data and do some spatial joins. So the join that we did already between the fire data and the management units was an attribute join. A spatial join is a little bit different. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's based on a spatial relationship between two layers that have geographic features. So for the I wanted to real quick show, I mentioned earlier how you can organize the table of contents in different ways. And now I actually have enough data for something like that to make sense. If I were to change my table of contents from list by drawing order to list by data source, you would see under each layer the file pathway of that
Paging.
data.
Eric, can you come to the front, please?
Eric's needed at the front. All right. The Grand Bay Fire table is stored on my desktop at my work computer, along with some of this other data here. You can see under North American Lakes and Rivers, it has this portal icon next to it. So we know that came from Living Atlas. Our base map and reference layers both come from ArcGIS.com. It's just another way that you can organize your table of contents. That might be a little interesting to see, but I like to keep it as listed by drawing order. Okay. So to use a join to answer some spatial questions we might have, maybe we want to see how many MSU extension offices are within 20 miles of the Pearl River. We could do this in a variety of ways. The way we're going to do it, I'm actually going to come over to North American Lakes and Rivers in my table of contents and expand that and turn off lakes because I don't need them for this exercise. Up here on the map tab in my selection group, I'm going to make sure I have the select cursor selected. And I'm going to click on the Pearl River, which is this river that runs by Jackson and down here along the western border of South Mississippi. Click on that. And that river is going to be highlighted on the map. So when I run this join, it's only going to run on the selected features. So we're going to add the spatial join to the MSU extension offices. If we right click on that layer, go to joins and relates, we're going to add spatial join. Our join features is going to be North American Lakes and Rivers / North American Rivers. And then you're going to see this toggle switch right here that says use selected records 1. I'm going to leave that toggle switch on because I only want this join to be applied to the Pearl River in this case. For match option, instead of intersect, I'll look at my drop down menu and I'll select within a distance, and I will type 20. And for my units, I wanted miles. And I'll hit OK. So nothing changed on my map. But if we open up the county extension attribute table, should have looked at this attribute table before we did this so that we could see. What's up, Eric?
Sure.
I thought y'all were friends.
Yeah. Hey, everything going good?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
All right, I won't be in that room.
All right, we'll do. Thanks. I knew I was going to get comment about my shirt today. So anyway, if we had looked at the attribute table for the extension offices, we would have only had the FID, shape, ID, county, and mailing address. These other fields came from the rivers attribute table. And we can know that by going to rivers and opening its attribute table. Side by side, we know we have county, name in English, name in original name in Spanish, French, length in kilometers. All of those fields were added to the extension office layer. Notice also that we have a lot of null values, except for those extension centers which were within 20 miles of the Pearl River. Those are the only ones that don't have null values in those columns. Again, this is so that we can see spatial relationships and increase our symbology options, which I'm going to do, but I'm going to do one more spatial join before I do that. Maybe two more. We'll join some point and line data. That's what we just did. So let's try some line and polygon data. We'll do a join between the census data and the rivers. And then we'll see how we can use all of these joins to actually do something for us. So we don't have to have the layer toggled on in the map in order for this to work, thankfully, because I don't want Pro to keep drawing this massive data set. We will look at the attribute table this time before we do the join. I think this didn't take that long to load, but it is a massive data set. There are a lot of fields in it. You'll see as I scroll through it. Names of blocks. Got some population data here. And if you want to know just how many features are in this data set, we can go to FID, right click this, and sort descending. And we've got over 112,000 polygons in this data layer. So this is probably bigger than any table that I would assume any of you are going to have to use for your own work. And I could be wrong. If I am, I apologize. That's terrible. So we already know what the rivers attribute table looks like. So we're going to right click on our census blocks, go to joins and relates, and we're going to add a spatial join. Our join features are going to be rivers. And this time I don't have that toggle switch about selected records popping up because I cleared my selection and I no longer have anything selected. If you still had something selected here, you could just turn that toggle switch off and it will still apply this join to all of the records within that, within that layer. For match option, I'm going to leave it as intersect because I want to know what census blocks are intersected by rivers in Mississippi for this exercise for whatever reason. So I'm just going to hit OK. That's going to run, and that might actually take a second because of just the sheer volume of data. That didn't take long. That's good. In the census blocks. Okay. So we're gonna check this table out now. The census blocks, we'll open that table back up. And at the very end of all of this data that the census layer already had in it, we scroll, we start finding the river data. And again, we have a lot of null values, and all of those null values are associated with census blocks that don't have a river intersect. Let's see here. Tennessee Tom Bigby River intersects this block. So what can we do with all this? What is the point? Doing a lot of joins, and nothing's changing on the map. So this is where data queries can come into play. If you stack data queries with table joins, you can start to find spatial relationships and patterns. And we're going to start by going back to the management units data that we were using at first, and then work our way back through the order that we did joins. So I'm going to toggle off my rivers, and I'm going to toggle off my county extension offices, and I'm going to right click on my burn units and zoom the layer so that I can see them. Open up the attribute table. Okay, so now I know I've got some null values in here, and that corresponds with management units that didn't get burned. So maybe I don't want to see those. I only want to see management units that got burned. I can right click on my layer here and go to properties, go to definition query, and add a new definition query. There's a variety of ways that we could go about structuring a definition query and end up at the same place. For us, the simplest way to do this one is to say where name is not null. And that's the end of that definition query. And hit apply, hit OK. And now I just had several management units disappear from the map view. Now they weren't deleted from my data, they still exist. This is more of just what's visible on the map. Okay, so now I'm getting somewhere. Now I've answered the question of, well, what management units actually got burned at Grand Bay? Well, maybe I want to symbolize this in a way that shows what management units have been burned the most all the way to the least. So in order to do this, we're going to select a name field, just like this one here, and then we're going to select summarize. Use filtered record 16. That's fine to leave toggled on. It doesn't really matter. What that's saying is there are 16 records that have been filtered out by that definition query that we just ran. And that's totally fine to leave there. Output table. I'm not going to be really picky about what Pro decides to name this. It is going to, by default, go in that Scratch Geodatabase. So again, because of what we set as a default earlier, it's keeping that clean for us. The field, we'll just select name and statistic type. Let's do count. Right, that's not what I had on here. Let's hit OK and see what that does for us. Okay, so it created a table that it threw over here in our table of contents. And if we open that table, we have name and we have frequency. Well, that's not right. It definitely got burned more than once. I didn't run the statistic right. Well, let's look back at Grand Bay Fire and open up its table and see if there is any sort of issue here. If I sort the names, definitely have more than one instance. If I look at my burn units and I sort its names, oh, so something went wrong with that first join that we did. So what I'm going to do to try to fix that is remove all joins from my burn units. Okay. And make sure that the query I just did, I'll undo that as well. Now I'm going to come back in here. I know that Grand Bay Fire, because I just looked at its attribute table. Yeah, we have multiple instances of fires at the same burn units in some cases. This one had quite a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fires in that same burn unit. So when I add a join, all of those should carry over. So we're going to try again. I could have just messed something up the first time. Input field, I'm going to go with name, join table, Grand Bay Fire, name. Pretty sure that's what I did before. Keep all input records. I'm going to check for me. I didn't get any sort of warnings, so I'm going to say okay. We won't stay in a rut here. If it doesn't work, we'll just move on. Let's sort this. We may come back to it. I'm really not sure why it's not behaving, but when does everything in GIS ever always behave? You know, especially when you're giving a training. All right. Yeah, we'll come back to that. I'll look at it during lunch. But we can run some definition queries on the other join tables to find some spatial relationships. So we'll forget about that for a minute and I'll figure that out. Our census blocks, I'm going to turn that on and zoom out. A lot of census blocks. And remember that we joined this data to the table of the rivers. So now all of these census blocks have a field that shows what river intersects them. And if I scroll over here, we'll go with name English. All the null values are the, like I said, the tracks or the blocks that don't have a river touching them or intersecting them. So we'll run a definition query based on this column right here. I right click my census blocks and I go to properties and add a new definition query. If this doesn't automatically load up, then select definition query over here on the left. For field, where I'm going to scroll down to until I find name English is equal to, we'll pick a river, Escatawpa River, or hit apply and hit OK. So if all went well, all of these blocks, except for the ones that are intersected by the Escatawpa River, should disappear. And it looks like Pro is trying to draw them down here. Could take a second for Pro to finish. Looks like it's doing it pretty quickly. Yeah, it's done. So now if for whatever reason, I just wanted to know that information, how many census blocks are intersected by the Escatawpa River, and I open up the attribute table, instead of having over 112,000 returns, once this loads up, we should be able to see how many returns we get back. Anyone have any questions while this is loading up about tables or anything? There we go. Okay. Let's see here. We scroll to the bottom of this attribute table. We now have 71 returns out of that 112,000 that was in the original data set by stacking a definition query on top of a table join. So the main reason that I'm going over this is just to show how you can take multiple tables, that may be seemingly unrelated data, and the only thing that they have in common is that they are tied to geographic data that exists in space somewhere. You can join them together and start running definition queries on them to basically ask the software geographic related questions. And, obviously this particular question probably has nothing to do with any of the work any of you do, but the idea remains the same. You can ask questions like this of your data by joining tables, by running definition queries, and you can stack definition queries as well. So if we were to look, let's look at what fields we have that we could potentially ask another question of this data before we break for lunch. We have some population data, perhaps. Let's sort descending here on this population data and see what kind of returns we get. Hopefully this doesn't take a long time. I don't know why it would, it's only 71 rows. All right, we don't need to know. That's okay. We can still run the definition query. So we'll come over here and add another definition query to the same layer. We're going to edit, and we're going to add a clause. Now, you're going to have a function here. It's going to be an and or function that shows how you want to relate these definition queries together. I'm going to leave it as and. Select a field. I'll go to that first population field, and maybe I want is greater than, and I don't know, I can see this drop down menu of the different values that I have available here. I'll just pick one, doesn't matter what, and hit apply, and hit OK. And we should. If it applied correctly, they may all be over. I don't think they are. It just didn't keep it for some reason. Let me do that one more time. Population is greater than, we'll just say 100, and apply. Oh, it's loading up now. Okay. It's just taking a while for some reason. Okay. And now Pro's got this spinning circle down here. It's going to redraw everything. We are obviously going to get way fewer returns on this than we did before because we're applying more filters to our data. I'm assuming that the reason it's taking so long is maybe it has to apply both of the definition queries that we've made to the entire original data set again. It's just a guess. I don't know why else it would take so long to draw, but we possibly only have these 3 blocks. So this is just to illustrate that you can stack joins on top of each other. You can stack definition queries on top of each other in order to parse out more information from the data that already exists in your tables. We know how to take those Excel spreadsheets, convert them into formats Pro can work with, bring those tables in, manipulate them, study the attribute data, join them together, run definition queries on them, and that's really the kind of overall thing that I'm trying to build to here is the really only limited by your imagination creativity that you can have with table data. I don't know if this is going to actually draw, so I'm kind of giving up on it here. So we'll check out the extension offices layer. That's the other one that we did a join on, and then after that we can break for lunch. I'm just going to toggle that off, the census data, and hope Pro doesn't just have a meltdown because it was trying to draw it. Oh my goodness. Okay, thank goodness. I'm going to toggle my extension office layer back on. And remember that we joined this to the rivers layer by saying we only want to see, we want to join based on which of these extension centers are within 20 miles of the Pearl River. So if we come to the attribute table, over here, all these null values, those are all of the extension centers that are not within 20 miles of the Pearl River. So we could run a very simple definition query on this one to tell it to return all of those values that are not null. So we'll exit out of the attribute table, right click the layer in the table of contents, go to properties, add a new definition query where name in English is not null. And apply, okay. And now it returned all of the extension offices within 20 miles of the Pearl River. We can toggle our rivers back on. Select the Pearl River and we see how that makes sense. So, that was data that didn't exist within our county extension office layer before we made the join, and we joined seemingly unrelated data together to throw a question at the software and get an answer back out of it. So, like I said, this can apply to any of your table data. And if you have any specific table data that you would like to try this out with, or that you have problems with or questions about, then bring that up after lunch, and we can get it shared over here, and we can work with it and see what other questions we can ask the data. Is there anything else that any questions anyone has before we break for lunch about all this? All right. So what I was originally trying to do with this, which we will get around to, is to take this feature layer that I have, polygon feature layer of the burn or the management units at Grand Bay, and connect it to this Grand Bay Fire standalone table that I have. We're still going to do that, but there's one step that I should have taken with the Grand Bay Fire standalone table before I joined it to my management units in order to ultimately get where I'm trying to go with this. So if we open up the table, we see that under name, we have some duplicates. Cottonmouth East, GBO6 North has 5 duplicates. Some of these names are weird because some of the management units are maintained and named by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Some of it is by DMR, and we have completely different naming systems, and it is just as confusing as it sounds. So these duplicates indicate that fire has been through those management units more than once, because each one of these rows is associated with one fire. That's why you have duplicate names over here, but you have different dates. So ultimately, where I want to go with this is I want to use my management unit feature class that I already have loaded up in my map view to create a choropleth style map that shows the frequency that the different management units have been burned in. So I need some sort of field to show me frequency of fire that I can use to symbolize my feature class. I'm going to add that to this table. Let's see, we'll come to name, right click on name, because that's where my duplicates are. And we'll summarize that field. Under statistic type, it already has count. If it doesn't, then I would go to this drop down menu and find count and select it. Case field is name, that is all correct. That's what I want. I'm going to hit OK. And that's not going to actually do anything to this table. It's going to create a new table that popped up over here in my table of contents. Bless you. If I open my new Grand Bay Fire statistics table, I will have a list of names and then a frequency column and a count column, which these are completely redundant, but nevertheless, they give me the information that I'm looking for that I can use to symbolize my map later on. So I need to tie this table to my feature layer table so that I can symbolize it. It's about these. I'll come over here to my feature layer. We go to join, relate, add join, input field, name, join table. The table that I want to join to this feature layer is my new Grand Bay Fire statistics, and the join field is name. So they have that in common. Again, whenever you're using a key to join two different tables, it's a field of the same data type. It doesn't have to be the same name. I have them as the same name here just because it does help me keep track of things and stay a little organized. So if I hit OK, what I'm hoping is when I open up my attribute table for my burn units now, yeah, so every unit that's had a fire will have a frequency and a count associated with that unit. Any null values are associated with units that have not received fire. So now I've done this join, and now I'm going to stack a definition query on top of it because I only want to see the burn units that have actually been burned. Let's exit out of here. We'll open up the properties of our layer and we'll add a new definition query where it could be any of these really. We'll say name is not null. Apply it. Okay. Now we only have the units that actually received fire. We look back at our attribute table. We don't have any more null values, and we can use this frequency column or the count column, either way, because they have the same data in them to symbolize our feature layer. So that's what we're going to do. We could right-click this layer and select symbology. We could also, while having the layer selected in the table of contents, come up here to the top and select feature layer. And you have symbology there as well. I'm going to look at this drop-down menu of symbology. And what I want to use is graduated colors because I want to symbolize the frequency in which these management units were burned. And I think that using increasingly darker shades of the same color is going to do that the best. Now, I'm not a big fan of this color scheme, and it's not symbolizing the correct field for what I want to do here. So under field, I would select either frequency or count name, doesn't matter, same. And so now we're starting to actually see something that visually tells us something without having to go into the attribute table and parse through all the information in the table. If we want to, we can, and 5 classes is fine because we don't have any management units in this data set that have been burned more than 5 times. If I did, I would bump those classes up to match the highest frequency number that I had in the attribute table. And we can select any color scheme we want to. Something like that, maybe. I think that might illustrate the point even better. So you could very easily add a legend to this, and a few of the other finished map essentials, and have a finished map just by joining tables and running definition queries on your tables, and then using all of your newly combined data to symbolize what you're seeing in your map view. That makes sense? That's all I was trying to do from the beginning. Okay, we'll save this project. Moving on. So before I do move on, so that's really all that I had planned about tables, unless there's anything related to tables that anybody here was hoping that I would cover, or questions that y'all have related to any sort of tabular data. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Because
I don't know if this would be a good question. When I was doing a project for class, and like I saved it and just left it, and I had all my tables and stuff, and everything was like, and I came back the next day, and it was just gone. Like all the data in my tables were just gone. There's like nothing in there. It's just empty. And then when I started clicking stuff, it was like, can't find it, can't find it. And I was like, why did that happen? I didn't even close it.
that kind of sounds to me like maybe a broken data link.
Okay.
So if I had to guess, these tables maybe were the file location of the tables, not anything within Pro, but the actual
Yeah.
file location of the tables may have been updated or moved or manipulated in some way, because Pro will only look for the data at the specified file pathway that it's told.
Does it change over time? Like if you just like, it
Shouldn't. I mean,
yeah.
if it wasn't messed with at all, then
Yeah.
no, it shouldn't. Do you think were your tables stored like locally on your computer, or were they in a shared location?
They shouldn't have been shared. It should have been in the same place.
Yeah. So that you're right. It might be one of those
Yeah,
unanswerable
it shouldn't have
questions.
been shared.
But it sounds like a broken data link. It sounds like wherever Pro was trying to look for the data was no longer there. Why, I don't know.
Yeah.
But you can, if you have a broken data link, you can reset the source for that data. So if you were to go in your File Explorer or whatever you want to use to find where that data is that Pro can't see, you can see on the screen. If I were to right click on one of these things here, it's been a minute since I did this. I think it might be under, yeah. If it's data, you go to set data source, and now I'm going to get this File Explorer dialog box pop up, and I can go pick the location where I want Pro to look for that data.
Okay.
Because it's I think probable that Pro just started looking in the wrong spot for that data for some reason.
That's what I think too, because I did it more than once and it kept doing it. And I was like, why is it moving? I'm not moving it at all. I let it pick where it wanted to go.
Yeah.
But
usually if you have a broken data link, next to that data in your table of contents, you'll have a little red exclamation mark next to the title of that layer or table or whatever it might be. And and then you just have to reset the data source.
okay. You should show with the scratch.
Oh yeah, let's take a look at how that's doing.
Yeah, I've never used that. It's a scratch. Yeah, we're talking about that earlier.
Yeah, let me pull some of this up here. So under the databases for our project, we did you see how we created the Scratch geodatabase at the beginning? We just added a database. We right click on databases, new file geodatabase. I named it the same as my default geodatabase, just with Scratch in front. And then I came over here to the analysis tab, clicked on environments. And for my Scratch workspace, I changed it to the new Scratch geodatabase that I created by browsing to it here. Before I changed it, both current and Scratch workspace was just the default geodatabase. And so we've been doing, several different processes through this training. And anytime we have one of those processes that creates an output, the default location has been our Scratch geodatabase. So we haven't been doing a whole lot, so we don't have a whole lot here, but it's there instead of,
Just a little.
yeah, in our CREC training geodatabase. We actually don't have anything in the CREC training geodatabase. But let's say that I created something that got sent to my Scratch geodatabase, and I want that to be a final piece of data that maybe I want to share with others, kind of like this, we'll use this hog point layer that I did. We can copy the data and paste it into our geodatabase.
Okay, that was easy.
Easy enough. You can drag it up into the other geodatabase if you want to. You can also, let me delete it. As I've said, there's 100 ways to do anything in Pro.
I noticed that.
While it's on the map here, if I wanted to, I can right click it, go to data and export features. And then for the output feature class, this would be useful if I wanted it to be maybe named something else when I move it over to my main geodatabase. I would browse to my databases, select my home geodatabase, come up with a name for it, and hit save, and then it would appear in my geodatabase under whatever name I gave it. With the same data, the only thing changed would be the name. So, we've got this stuff right here, and that's not much, but if I were running a lot of geoprocessing tools, this could be filled with
That's what I was
dozens
doing with
of
that
layers.
project, and that's why I just wanted to figure here out every time. I was like, I don't even know anymore,
Yeah,
but I will do that next time, and maybe that will help.
yeah. Appreciate the questions. All right, moving on from tables. One of the more popular survey responses that I was really iffy about getting into is editing vector data, and that's just because there's an almost infinite number of ways I could take that topic. And I don't exactly know what everybody has in mind when they say they want to know more about editing vector data, but I'll just cover some very basic stuff about it. And then if anyone has any, more specific questions, then we can get into it. So vector data, most everyone here probably knows you're talking about point line and polygon data, not raster data. So right now we have loaded up several vector layers, the rivers, Grand Bay hogs, the county extension offices, all this different stuff. Let's, we can stick with our burn units that we have symbolized here. So if I go to the edit tab, maybe I should talk about how to create a new vector layer first. Let's do that. So over here in whatever geodatabase you would like for your new feature class to be, because that's what Pro saves vector data as, is feature classes instead of shape files. I can right click on my geodatabase, go to new, and select feature class. And I could name this, whatever it happens to be, just points of interest for now. When it comes to the name, this is the file name. Pro does not like spaces. We can use underscores in place of spaces, but for file names, Pro's not going to like it if you try to use spaces. You can't move on. You can put spaces in the alias. And whenever you add that layer to your map view, your alias is what is going to appear over here in your drawing order. So if you want to have something that makes a little more sense than, you know, the name that has no spaces, you can do that here. And then whenever you're doing things like adding legends to your layouts and whatnot, it's the alias that's going to appear in your legend, which is nice. I mean, you can always change the text within legends as you add legends to the map, but it's nice when it just loads up as like a legible, clean name from the get-go. Because I named this points of interest, we're going to change the type of feature this is to a point. And you can flip through 6 pages of borderline nonsense, or you can just hit the finish button. But because this is a training,
That's cool.
if you want to, here you can add fields to what's going to be the attribute table for this layer. You can do that at any point after the layer is created, so you don't have to do it here. You may not even know exactly what fields you're going to end up with. Or maybe you're just creating a feature class so that you can join it to a table full of data that exists already. We all know how to do that. So we could add, you know, whatever we want here. Let's say we want to add a latitude field, and that's going to be numeric, and a longitude field will also be numeric. Cool, that's all I'm going to do for now. Next, you can select the spatial reference for the data. Now, some of that is going to be determined by what defaults you set for Pro. In the very beginning, when we were looking at the options dialog box for setting defaults in Pro, I showed that I had this State Plain Mississippi East spatial reference as my default, so that's what it's going to load new feature classes as. Some of that also depends on your geodatabase that you're creating new feature into and what spatial references are associated with that. Or, you know, maybe you're making this data for somebody and they're asking for it in a particular spatial reference. You can search the coordinate system database within Pro right here and select a different spatial reference for your new data if you want to. Tolerances aren't even worth talking about. Resolution, next, all this stuff, we'll finish. Okay, so it's going to appear in a couple of places. It appears over here in my geodatabase where the file itself is saved, and it also appears over here in my drawing order because I have, this is also a default that you can set. I have Pro set to automatically add new layers to my map as I create them. But there's no data in it. If we open up the attribute table, we can see that we have the object ID and shape fields, which, like I mentioned before, Pro adds automatically to your attribute table just for its own data management system, and the lat long fields that I manually added, but no rows. Add rows. We can come to the Edit tab at the top of the ribbon and open up the Create pane within the Features group. When you open up the Create pane, you're going to get the option to create feature class data for any of the vector layers that are already on your map. I'm going to select points of interest, the one that we just came up with, and that's going to allow me to place points anywhere I want to. If you have snapping turned on, then as you get close to other vector data on the map, it will snap your cursor to the endpoints and midpoints of vertice lines on your existing vector data. If you're trying to make data butt up to other data, then that's useful. If you're not, it's extremely annoying, but you can turn it off. And then I can place the dot anywhere I want to without the software grabbing my cursor and pulling it around. So maybe I know the Grand Bay office building's right there. I want to point there. I know over here there's a boat launch. I want to point there. Okay, let's do one more. Right here's a train track crossing. So if I want to save my edits, I come over here to this save button within the Manage Edits group. Whatever the last feature was that you added is going to be selected. I'm just going to clear my selection and get rid of that. And I mentioned earlier, you've got the keyboard shortcut of holding C down. So if I were zoomed in to the map and I were adding dots and whatnot, and I got to the edge of my map, I could just hold down C. It would give me my Explore hand. I could move over. When I let go of C, I get my editing tool back. And that's probably the most useful keyboard shortcut in all of ArcPro. Okay. So now if we check out our points of interest, our attribute table, now we've got rows. We just created each one of those rows is associated with one of those points that we put on the map. Our lat and long fields are full of null values because ArcPro has no idea what we want in those fields. But we can calculate them just like we did with the acres field that we added to the management unit feature layer. So if I right click on latitude, I calculate its geometry. The property, I want y coordinate, right? Yes. Always have to think about that. And I can also calculate the other field while I'm here. Longitude, that's going to be my x coordinate. And we'll just run this and see what happens. And there we go. Now, this is in format. So what if we don't like the way that looks? Let's right click on that layer. This is the right one, right? Yeah. Go to data design and fields. Latitude, longitude, number format. Let's see what's going on here. Category. Okay, all of that looks fine. So what I'm going to do is modify the calculation that we just did. X coordinate format, same as the input. Maybe instead I want decimal degrees because that makes more sense to me than these numbers here. But you can choose any coordinate format that you want to. And maybe if you were making this layer to share with someone, maybe they have some coordinate format they've requested. And you can select that there. Hit OK. These numbers make a lot more sense to my brain. I don't know about you. Okay, that is to say, I'll just save the project. So that's what creating a vector layer from scratch looks like. The process looks exactly the same, whether you're creating point, line, or polygon features. You just select what you want. And the very first pane of creating a new feature class. Along with feature classes, you can also create featured data sets. So if I were to come to my geodatabase here, new featured data set. data set name, you know, this could be anything, but let's just say we name it. Actually, can we put a space here? Yeah, we can. Name it Grand Bay. It lied to me. Told you, yeah, all right, all is good. So now I have this feature data set, which, like I mentioned before, is kind of like a drawer within the overall filing cabinet that is the geodatabase. And maybe I've got several Grand Bay related feature classes that I would like to go inside of this feature data set. I could move my points of interest. Spatial references do not match. Well, that's a problem. Let's see here. Your spatial references do have to match. So if they don't, let's see here. Go to properties. What is the spatial reference of my feature data set? This right here. So I'm gonna copy this. Okay. Now to resolve that issue, we can bring up our geoprocessing tools. I've got mine up here on the quick start. Any button that you use a lot in Pro, you can add to your quick start bar across the top of the page. If I go to view, there's my geoprocessing. If I right click it, I can add to quick access toolbar, and that's what I've done with that button already. That's why it's here. And I'm going to bring up the project tool. The great thing about tools within ArcPro and the way that Esri named them is the name of the tool is usually whatever the tool does. So if you don't know the name of the tool, but you know what it does, just start typing that function in and you're probably going to find what you're looking for. So my input is going to be points of interest. Right, my coordinate system is that default that I set before. The output coordinate system, let's see. I'm going to hit this browse button for coordinates, and I'm going to paste that coordinate system that I copied earlier. There it is. Okay. And run it. So it didn't change the coordinate system of the original data. It just created a copy of that layer that is now in a different coordinate system. And that layer can then be moved into the featured data set. Let's see here, where's my scratch? That's where it would have appeared. This here. Move it into Grand Bay. It's copying. Now it gave me no issue because my coordinate systems match. Another thing that I could have done, which would have been an even better thing to do, is when creating that featured data set, I could have specified that the coordinate system for this data set is that state plane Mississippi East coordinate system that my other data is in. And then I would have had no problem moving that data into that featured data set. So that's kind of how you build out a geodatabase from scratch. Creating data. So what are some other, we'll just go ahead and remove this from the map. Somebody else is burning up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so hot.
It's not 74. Says it's 74.
I'm not 74.
Don't believe that at all. Just keep bumping it down and see what happens. We'll look at a couple other editing tools and then we'll break. All right, so under editing, our create features pane is still open. It's just covered up by the catalog pane. I can come down here and click on that tab. Points of interest. So right now it's giving me my create tool. But let's say that instead of creating a point, I wanted to change the position of one of these points. You have a suite of editing tools up here, and if you hit this drop down menu button, you can see a lot more editing tools. Some of these may, I'm not really sure, require certain license and permissions from your hosting agency, but most of them shouldn't. And some of these I use on a regular basis. Some of them I have never used before, and they are for very, very specific use cases. But I use move a good bit. When you have the move tool selected, modified features pane pops up, move tool selected, and I select one of my features. It's going to highlight it, give me the ability to grab it, and move it around on the map. Now, I doubt, let's move it over here to this intersection. I doubt my table of contents is going to update my lat long fields because typically Pro just doesn't automatically do that sort of thing. So I would have to recalculate those fields in order to represent accurately where that point is now. If I come down here and hit the finish button, that point now exists over here. We can edit vertices. Now this is more so for line and polygon data. Say I click one of these polygons in my management units, I can see all of the vertices that make up that shape. Zoom in to see it a little better. My shortcut key C to move around. I can select any of these and move them. If I have this add button selected down here and I click anywhere on a line, then I'm adding a vertex. Say that this isn't actually straight and there's something that this line goes around right there. I can grab it and move it up. Maybe I need to add a couple more and show that it really makes a hard turn right there and then comes back to being straight. You can do a lot with editing vertices of existing vector data. Same goes for a line. It would be the exact same process. I'm not going to keep those edits. Just wanted to illustrate how all of that works. And it's 12:53. So as promised, I'll break right here. And anybody or all of us who want to go check out Keith's defense, it's a good time. Sharing data from Pro looks considerably different than sharing data from ArcMap, if you're more familiar with ArcMap. Up on the ribbon, you have a Share tab and a whole host of options and tools that allow you to package either layers or maps or projects or geodatabases or literally anything, and be able to share those packaged files with your coworkers or whoever you're going to be sharing data with. You know, if there wasn't this sign-in caveat with Pro, then I would say the easiest thing to do would be to upload it directly to an online account. I can show what that looks like. So let's say we wanted to take our burn units. Let me clear the selection that we have on one of the features of that layer. And within this package group, we could package the layer. If we were going to upload this to an online account, we could also share as a web layer. For the first example, I'll just click on layer within the package group. Now, there's already a little bit of metadata associated with this data, and I'm going to kind of lump metadata and sharing in together, because when you write metadata, all of that is going to be shared and packaged along with the layer. So up at the top under Start Packaging, you can see that Upload Package to Online Account is selected by the default, and it will upload this to whatever online account is signed into Pro, which in this case is mine, and in y'all's case I don't think is an option, unfortunately. What you can do is save package to a file, which instead of uploading this directly to ArcGIS Online, it'll save it to whatever location you browse to and specify through this browse button right here under Item Details and Name. Name the package, select the location where it's going to be stored, and then you can take that package and either upload it to your Google Drive or email it to someone, and they're going to get, in this case, this layer with all of its attributes and whatnot, whatever summary that you would like to write about the data, whatever tags you would like to include about the data. If the data already has metadata written about it, Pro will pull that information in and insert that information into the summary and tags dialog box for you. So in this package, we have included layers. We could include more layers in this if we wanted to, but we're just doing one. You can also, whenever you package or make a sharing package, you can include attachments, things that can't necessarily be included within a layer or within the project. Say a finished map that you exported as a PDF or Excel spreadsheet. You can attach it here. This browse button. This is my final maps folder that it conveniently loaded up. So maybe if I wanted to include some map that was relevant to the layer that I am packaging to share with someone, I could do that, and instead of having to send multiple different files.
So I was able to get it to work and send it to my ArcGIS online account.
How'd you do that?
It just, so I chose it, when you choose, yeah, when you choose upload package, it opens it up in the internet, and then you just log into your ArcGIS online account.
Oh,
Or how
perfect.
that logged in. Yeah, and it worked.
Wow, that's great. And then it doesn't subsequently sign you into Pro?
It will ask you to go into Pro, but it's, oh, it is logged in. Yeah, it did log me in.
You're gonna get a phone call.
Let's see.
I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's not a problem. I don't know. I don't fully understand the restrictions that are put on your ArcGIS online accounts.
I accidentally locked myself out of mine and got myself my IP ban.
Sweet.
Yeah, and I had to call and make a whole new thing, and they're like, we're not touching.
Yeah,
this
she's
thing.
next.
And it was simply
down the
because
road.
I did like offline or like remote desktop, I switched that on and it freaked out. And it's like, okay, can't even.
Wow. Yeah. So, you know, any advice that I give today about sharing data, you just take that through the filter of whatever
To do anything later.
whatever your organization allows or doesn't allow. This is how you can do it without extra restrictions.
You probably have to call the person that sent this in.
I have a question about the tags.
Sure.
I've never seen it or heard of it. What is that useful for?
So it becomes useful whenever you are logged into ArcGIS Online, and I'll show why. This thing get out of my way. And I just, okay. God. Okay. So this piece of data here has horrible metadata, as in none. So whoever uploaded this, whatever KG 160, included no metadata. Do what? Yeah. I hope you're in on the Zoom call right now.
Christina yours? I was like, it's not yours because it's Christina.
Whenever you write metadata in either in ArcGIS Online or Pro, all of that metadata will show up in the web page for that layer. So I just grabbed this as a random piece of content from the MSU organization content gallery. And so, if all of the metadata was filled out, you would have a description here, you would have a summary written, you would have, terms of use if there were any. Even if there weren't, it's worth putting in there, free to use as you want to, just so nobody wonders about it. If no special restrictions or limitation has been provided, then you don't know if, I guess legally speaking, there would be no restrictions, but you don't really know if the owner of that data intended for there to be or not, or if they were just lazy about the metadata. For tags, you can use tags to help filter data that you are looking through in ArcGIS Online. So that's when they become important. If I were to go back to the content page, hopefully that's where I was at. Yeah. For tags, I can select tags, and now all of the tags that have been used for all of this data, I can now use to filter my browsing options. And so if say that you all created a group in ArcGIS Online and added all of your profiles to that group and decided, okay, when we create content, we're going to use these predetermined tags on all of our data, and then any additional tags that are specific to that, individual data. But on all the data, we're going to use these common tags. Then someone could easily go into the content for your organization and filter by those tags and see just, y'all's content. It's just another way to filter and stay organized. So within Pro, it's not quite as useful, but within Online, it's very useful. They have almost 700 pieces of content here. And you should see the NOAA Geodatabase or the NOAA Geo platform that my account is hosted on. It's just an unbelievable amount of data. So yeah, whenever you have your own content uploaded to ArcGIS Online and you go to the web page for that content, you'll be able to edit all those different things, the description, the summary, the terms of use, the tags, and that will stay with that data as metadata if you were to bring it out of ArcGIS Online and into Pro. If I were to go back to Pro, let's turn off this other stuff here. We'll get to where we can see our data a little better. I have my burn units. If I right click on the layer, I have options to either view the metadata or edit metadata. I know I was talking about sharing, but now I'm off on this side tangent. No, why you're telling me this. Let's look at that again. Viewing metadata. Okay, so here you see there's a thumbnail of the data. Now this looks a bit different than what we have on the map, but that's just because we've run table joins and definition queries on it to view certain spatial relationships and information that we want to see pertaining to this data. But if we were to take those joins and queries off of the data, this is what the entire data looks like. I like to add thumbnails of what my data looks like to my metadata. I think that's the most useful piece of metadata you can have. And most of the time, for me, doing that looks a lot like turning my base map off, turning my reference off, getting my snipping tool and just taking a screenshot of it and saving it, and then adding that to the metadata. So these are all the same, I guess, types of metadata that you're going to see in ArcGIS online. And, it's the same whether you're in Pro or online. Let's see. Let's look at something we can actually edit. Maybe our brand new feature class that we just made, our points of interest feature class. If we were to edit the metadata, we would right away be met with what is required because we're going to add metadata. You have to have title, tags, and summary. Everything else is optional, but definitely recommended. And here's where you can add a thumbnail. So if I were to go back to my map and load up points of interest and turn off. Now, these points don't really tell me anything, so maybe I do want to have the light gray base so that I can have some amount of reference whenever I'm looking at the thumbnail for this. And I would probably want to change the symbology of these points to where they show up a lot better for the purposes of the metadata thumbnail. Go ahead, snip, screen grab from this, save that somewhere, and then update the thumbnail by going to that location wherever I saved that image. And that's now my metadata thumbnail. So maybe this is going to be Grand Bay points of interest. Add tags to it. Like Grand Bay, just hit enter to finish a tag. Thought. Do anything. Maybe National Wildlife Refuge. Here. And these points represent, I don't know, places around the Grand Bay area. If I was actually writing metadata, I would write something a lot better than that, but that's my bare minimum metadata requirements. Save that metadata up here in this manage metadata group. And if I were to take points of interest, package this. Oh, yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about that. Save this package to a file. To our home file. Spaces. Oh, why did I do that? Save it there. We can analyze it if we want to make sure there's not going to be any issues with packaging. I don't anticipate there being any because it's such a simple thing to package. And we'll package it. All right, we hit manage package. It'll show us this right here. LPKX file is a file extension of a layer package. And this can be uploaded to Google Drive, it can be emailed to someone, it can be uploaded to ArcGIS Online. If it is uploaded to ArcGIS Online, all of that metadata, all that metadata, that little bit of metadata that I wrote about it will also carry into ArcGIS Online and be part of that data's content webpage. You can also package an entire project. Things to know about that. If I were to package the project, new project package, you also get the option to upload it to an online account or save the package to a file. You should know though, when you package a project, all of your map tabs and all of your layout tabs that you may have open, we happen to just have one map tab, are going to go into that project package along with all of the data that is currently on any of your map tabs. If you have other data that you would like to be included in the project package that isn't on a map but is over here in one of your geodatabases or one of your folders, that data is not going to be carried on with the project package. You have to, any data you want to be included with that project package, add to the map. So if you have a finished out map and it is like, you don't want to mess with it, but there's some extra data that you would like to be included with your project package, just insert another map tab here and throw it on there. That way all of the data is included. When you package a project this way, you're typically going to negate any sort of issues with broken data links, because all of that data is included with the map. So whoever is opening that project doesn't have to have access at all to the original sources for the data that's in the project. So great way to get around broken data links. Just make sure all the data that you want included is on a map somewhere in the project, not just in a geodatabase. Same goes for a map. You can package up a map out of a project. If somebody doesn't need the whole project and they just need a map, you can do that. And the idea is pretty much exactly the same. Let's see, do I have anything else I wanted to mention about that? Of course, I just locked this thing again. I mentioned earlier that KMLs were probably the lowest point of entry into sharing spatial data with other folks. Really easy to do that. It's really easy to take any of your layers and convert them to a KML. We go to our geoprocessing pane. Like I said, Esri, let's just exit out of it. That's really cool. Esri names all of their tools based off of how they function. So if I just type in KML, I have some tools related to KMLs and I want to convert a layer to KML. So say my input layer is my points of interest. We'll use that again. For my output file, there's my home desktop. CREC GIS training is the organizational infrastructure we made in the beginning. We'll open that up, and I made a folder just for KMLs. So I'll open that up. I'll name the KML. I'll just say POI for points of interest. I would come over here to all supported types and I would select KML. If you select KMZ, you can still send that file to whoever is asking for it, but then they have to unzip it before they can use it. And if you're sending this to someone who just wants a file that they can tap on and it open in Google Earth, then select KML as the file type. So we'll save that. And we'll run the tool. Runs really fast because there's only 3 points in this. So if I were to minimize all that and go look for that KML, there's that KML. And most people, if they have Google Earth installed on their device that they are using to open up the file, typically that will be the default for opening a KML. I double click on that KML. Another screen. It's over here. I already had some stuff loaded up on this KML, so we'll just uncheck them. Where's the thing that I just added? Oh, there they are. There's thumbtacks here, because that's Google Earth's horrendous default for point features. That can be changed if you want to, but this just goes to show, you know, you send somebody the KML file. It was something that was existing in Arc Pro. Maybe they have no idea what Arc Pro is, but they have Google Earth on their phone. This is something they can open up in the field. And I use it all the time. As you see here, this is parcel data that is categorized by what feds own versus state versus county versus private. And we use that all the time out at Grand Bay. Back to my other screen. Okay. So really, all I really had left was just suggesting that I would try to get onto the Mississippi State ArcGIS Online Geo platform, familiarize yourself with it in your profile. If y'all would like to use it for storing and sharing spatial data, then make a group that you add all of your account profiles to, and just start using it. You know, if it gets cluttered up, then start over and make a organizational structure for yourself. You know, it takes, especially when it comes to sharing spatial data with a group, it takes a lot of communication. And you know, we'll make just text files as README files that we store along with spatial data sometimes that people can go and read. This is how you should, if you're going to park data here, this is how the metadata should be written. This is the spatial reference that it should be. Here's all the rules so that we just keep this house clean. I highly recommend doing that. I don't want to break a system if it's not broken. So if y'all using Google Drive works great, then keep it up. But I got a feeling about that.